The lights dimmed, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The tension in the air was palpable, every eye in the arena glued to the ring. Two giants of the sport were about to collide, both men with histories as rich as they were controversial. The crowd was restless, but they weren't waiting for just any fight. This wasn't a typical heavyweight bout. This was personal. The battle between these two champions, with their contrasting styles and personalities, would go down as one of the most iconic moments in boxing history. Mike Tyson, the ferocious and unpredictable force of nature, stood in one corner, his presence almost intimidating. Known for his lightning-fast knockouts and raw aggression, Tyson had dominated the heavyweight division in a way that no one before him had. His reputation was one of brutality, his fists known to end fights in the blink of an eye. Tyson wasn't just a boxer, he was a phenomenon unbeatable, relentless, and a force that seemed almost unstoppable. But even the most dangerous predators have their weaknesses, and Tyson's past was filled with moments of chaos and controversy that often overshadowed his greatness in the ring. Across from him, Evander Holyfield was calm, composed, and determined. He had earned his own reputation as a fierce competitor, a man who wasn't afraid to face adversity head-on. His technical skill and strategic approach had made him one of the most respected heavyweights in boxing. Holyfield's journey wasn't without its struggles, though he had to fight not only against his opponents but also against the expectations placed on him. His rise to the top wasn't as fast or flashy as Tyson's, but Holyfield's heart, discipline, and belief in himself had made him a champion in his own right. Their paths had crossed before, but this fight, the one everyone had been talking about for years, was unlike anything anyone could have anticipated. It was a clash of two distinct forces: Tyson, the wild, unpredictable brawler, and Holyfield, the thoughtful, methodical strategist. As the bell rang, the two men took their positions, ready to prove who was truly the king of the heavyweight division. From the moment the fight began, it was clear that this was no ordinary matchup. Tyson came out swinging, his fists moving with the speed and power that had terrorized the division for years. Holyfield, however, didn't flinch. He absorbed the pressure and started to move with purpose, carefully watching Tyson's every move. He knew that Tyson's power was his greatest asset, but it was also his greatest flaw. Holyfield understood that it wasn't just about withstanding Tyson's punches. It was about controlling the tempo of the fight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the rounds went on, the intensity only increased. Tyson's aggression never wavered, but it became clear that Holyfield's experience and discipline were starting to turn the tide. Holyfield wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. His tactics were beginning to frustrate Tyson, who was used to dominating his opponents with sheer force. The two fighters were locked in a battle of wills, each trying to impose their style, but neither willing to give an inch. Tyson's rage started to build as he realized that Holyfield wasn't going anywhere. But then, something happened that no one expected. Tyson, unable to land the knockout punch he so desperately wanted, became more reckless. His anger boiled over, and he started to make mistakes that Holyfield, ever the strategist, was quick to capitalize on. With a counter-punch here, a clever dodge there, Holyfield began to break Tyson down piece by piece, causing the tide of the fight to turn in his favor. As the rounds wore on, the atmosphere became even more intense. The crowd, which had been firmly behind Tyson at the start, was now divided. Some cheered Holyfield's composure and technique, while others were left speechless by Tyson's uncharacteristic lack of control. This was supposed to be Tyson's fight, his moment to solidify his place as the greatest. But Holyfield, through grit and determination, was proving that there was more than one way to win. But just as the momentum shifted, something shocking happened, a moment of chaos that would define the fight for years to come. Tyson, frustrated and desperate, did the unthinkable. In a move that stunned everyone watching, he bit Holyfield's ear, drawing blood and causing an uproar in the arena. The act was so unexpected, so out of character, that it left people questioning everything they thought they knew about the man in the ring. How had Tyson, the man with the fierce reputation, resorted to such a desperate, unsportsmanlike act? The fight was stopped, and Tyson was disqualified. Holyfield had won, but it wasn't the victory anyone had imagined. The world watched in disbelief as Tyson's reputation, already tarnished by past controversies, took another devastating blow. The headlines the next day weren't about Holyfield's victory. It was about Tyson's fall from grace. But the story didn't end there. Tyson, ever the unpredictable figure, would go on to claim that his actions had been a result of frustration and personal struggles, offering a glimpse into the darker side of his persona. Meanwhile, Holyfield would cement his place as a true champion, one who had weathered the storm and remained unshaken by the madness surrounding him. Their rivalry, however, was far from over. The world had seen one of the most unforgettable moments in boxing history, but would Tyson ever truly reclaim his position at the top? Could Holyfield continue to defend his title, or would the unpredictable force of Tyson eventually get the better of him? The questions loomed large, and the world was left waiting for the next chapter of this legendary saga. The fallout from the fight was immediate, but the consequences were far-reaching. Mike Tyson, once the youngest heavyweight champion in history, had seen his invincible image shattered in a way no one could have predicted. The biting incident was more than just an act of desperation. It was a window into the deep psychological struggles that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. Tyson's career, already marred by controversies, had taken yet another dark turn. He wasn't just fighting in the ring. He was battling his own demons. The public, once captivated by his unmatched talent and ferocity, now turned their attention to what lay beneath the surface. What had driven Tyson to such a desperate act? Was it just frustration over his performance, or was there something deeper at play? Meanwhile, Evander Holyfield stood in the spotlight, but his journey to the top had been far from smooth. The world saw him as a victor, but the man behind the victory had endured his own share of struggles. Holyfield's rise in boxing wasn't a story of fast-track glory like Tyson's. Holyfield had earned his spot the hard way through years of grueling training, overcoming injuries, and proving himself in the ring time and again. While Tyson had been the wild child of the sport, Holyfield had always been the methodical, disciplined fighter. The one who followed the rules, both inside and outside the ring. His victory over Tyson was seen by many as the ultimate testament to his resilience, but it also opened a new chapter in his own career that would prove just as complex and challenging. As the dust settled, Tyson retreated into seclusion, becoming more of a mystery with each passing day. His camp released statements claiming that the fighter was going through a rough period, battling personal issues that he had yet to confront. His disqualification in the Holyfield fight wasn't the only setback Tyson had faced in recent years. His career had been plagued by legal troubles, personal scandals, and a growing sense of instability. In a sense, Tyson's fall from grace had been a long time coming, but no one could have predicted it would end in such a public spectacle. On the other side, Holyfield was dealing with his own challenges, though they were of a different nature. His win had brought him the recognition he had long sought, but it also placed an enormous weight on his shoulders. Expectations were higher than ever. People wanted to see him defend his title and continue his dominance, But Holyfield wasn't just battling opponents in the ring, he was fighting the pressure to maintain his status as a champion. For all his skill and discipline, Holyfield was acutely aware of the thin line that separated victory from defeat. His rise to the top had been a testament to his hard work, but it wasn't without sacrifice. There were rumors of injuries he was hiding, whispers about how his body was beginning to betray him after years of relentless training. And yet, Holyfield carried on. He didn't just want to win for himself. He wanted to prove that he was more than just a stepping stone in Tyson's legacy. He wanted to show that his victory wasn't a fluke, that he was worthy of being called champion, that he could sustain greatness. But the pressure was starting to build, and there were moments when even Holyfield doubted if he could carry the weight of that responsibility. His victory had catapulted him to the top, but it had also placed him directly in the crosshairs of anyone who wanted to take him down. Behind the scenes, the boxing world was abuzz with speculation. What would happen next? Would Tyson ever return to the ring with the same fire that once made him unstoppable? Could Holyfield continue to reign as champion, or would his own inner struggles catch up with him? Both men had become larger-than-life figures, but their paths forward were uncertain. The future of the heavyweight division seemed to hinge on the unpredictable outcome of their next encounter, but there was more to the story than just the rivalry between the two fighters. Tyson, locked away in his own world, began to train again, but this time something was different. His obsession with reclaiming his spot at the top took on a new intensity. Tyson was no longer fighting just for titles or legacy. He was fighting to silence the critics, to prove that he wasn't finished, that he could rise from the ashes. But there were signs that his journey back to the ring was fraught with complications. His training was erratic, his focus wavering. Tyson's personal life was in disarray, and it seemed like every time he took a step forward, he was pulled back by some new controversy or legal issue. Still, the world couldn't look away. Tyson's return had become an event in itself, one that promised to be as unpredictable and thrilling as the fighter himself. Holyfield, on the other hand, was preparing for the inevitable. As the reigning champion, he knew that the target on his back had grown exponentially. The moment Tyson's name resurfaced in the headlines, the boxing world began speculating about a potential rematch. Holyfield had already faced critics questioning whether his victory had been a fluke, but now the narrative was shifting. Could he handle Tyson in a second fight? Was his victory a one-time triumph, or could he repeat it? Holyfield had always prided himself on his heart and his ability to rise above adversity, but even he couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. His camp had begun discussing strategies and preparing for Tyson's return. They knew it wouldn't be the same fight. Tyson was coming back with vengeance in his eyes. As the story unfolded, the fans, the media, and the fighters themselves were caught in a web of uncertainty. Everyone knew a rematch between Tyson and Holyfield was inevitable, but no one could predict what it would look like. Would Tyson be the same unstoppable force he once was, or had the years of personal turmoil and public disgrace changed him forever? Could Holyfield continue to dominate, or would his moment of glory slip through his fingers in the face of Tyson's relentless determination? There were no answers, only the rising tension of what was to come, leaving the world on the edge of its seat. As the months went by, the anticipation surrounding the potential rematch between Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield grew to a fever pitch. Boxing fans, sports analysts, and even casual observers couldn't stop talking about it. Would Tyson, the once unstoppable force, reclaim his throne? Or would Holyfield, the calm, composed strategist, once again prove that he was more than a match for the chaos Tyson embodied? The world seemed to be waiting for the inevitable clash, as the stakes couldn't have been higher. Tyson, however, was starting to show signs of becoming something different, a version of himself that no one had expected. While his training seemed intense, there was a different energy surrounding him this time. He wasn't just training for a rematch. It was as if he was preparing for something much bigger. His team had noticed the shift too, but no one quite knew what to make of it. Tyson wasn't just throwing punches in the gym anymore. He was shadowboxing against his own mind. His erratic behavior, once a part of his charm, had become unpredictable in a more dangerous way. His camp wasn't sure if they were dealing with a reformed man or one teetering on the edge of a breakdown. His return to the ring seemed imminent, but no one knew if it would be the triumph they'd expected or the tragic end of a legend. In the meantime, Holyfield's world was becoming just as complicated. He had weathered the storm of public opinion after his first victory over Tyson, but the pressure was mounting. His body, once a well-oiled machine, was beginning to show the wear of years of punishing training. His camp had been working tirelessly to keep him in peak physical condition, but whispers began to spread that Holyfield wasn't the fighter he once was. Some even suggested that he might be on the decline. That age and the toll of his career were starting to catch up with him. It wasn't just his body, though it was his mind. Holyfield had always been known for his mental fortitude, but the constant pressure to live up to his past success had begun to erode that confidence. His self-doubt started to creep in as he struggled with the notion that perhaps his best days were behind him. But the unexpected twist came from a place no one had anticipated. Tyson, the man who had once been known for his raw physicality, had transformed his approach to the sport. In a shocking announcement, it was revealed that Tyson had hired an unexpected figure, a psychologist, someone who could help him channel his inner turmoil and provide the mental clarity he desperately needed. This new addition to his team was not just a coach, but someone who would help Tyson address his personal demons and reframe his mindset. For the first time in years, Tyson seemed focused not just on the physical aspects of the fight, but on his emotional and psychological state. The world watched in disbelief as Tyson, once the symbol of rage and chaos, seemed to be attempting a complete reinvention. Holyfield, too, began to show signs of change. The pressure to defend his title had led him down a path of relentless self-analysis, where he scrutinized his every move, every punch. He hired new trainers, revamped his strategy, and began studying Tyson's previous fights with a new intensity. He was no longer just preparing for a fight. He was preparing for war. But the more he pushed himself, the more the weight of his responsibilities seemed to drag him down. The fear of losing everything he had worked for started to consume him. He was no longer just fighting for victory. He was fighting to hold on to the success he had gained. The battle wasn't just taking place in the ring anymore. Outside the spotlight, both Tyson and Holyfield were engaged in a fight against their own fears, doubts, and insecurities. The public's gaze, once full of admiration and hope, had turned into a microscope, amplifying every flaw, every misstep. The weight of their legacies hung over them like a heavy cloud. Tyson, once untouchable, now seemed fragile, his mental battles becoming just as important as his physical ones. Holyfield, meanwhile, was drowning in the expectations of a world that refused to see him as anything but the champion, unaware of the personal struggles that he was hiding. Then, the unthinkable happened. Just days before the long-awaited rematch was scheduled to take place, a shocking revelation hit the headlines. Tyson had suffered an injury during his final training session. The nature of the injury was unclear, but rumors began to swirl that it was more serious than Tyson's camp was willing to admit. Was it a torn ligament? A broken bone? Or was it something else entirely, a mental or emotional setback that was more debilitating than any physical wound could be? The timing of the injury only added to the drama, and the world waited on tenterhooks as Tyson's team scrambled to make an official statement. For Holyfield, the news of Tyson's potential withdrawal from the fight brought a mix of emotions. Part of him was relieved he was ready to face Tyson, but he knew the risk involved in going toe-to-toe with a man so unpredictable. But another part of him felt a sense of dread. What if Tyson wasn't able to fight? What if this injury, whether real or exaggerated, ended the chance for him to defend his title against the man who had haunted his dreams for years? Holyfield needed this fight, not just to prove his dominance, but to silence the critics who still believed that his victory over Tyson had been a fluke. He didn't want his championship to be tainted by the lack of closure. As the days dragged on and the fight's status remained in limbo, Tyson's injury became the focal point of every conversation. Would he recover in time to face Holyfield? Was the injury part of a strategy to lure Holyfield into a false sense of security? Was Tyson playing mind games, using the public's doubt against his opponent? For Holyfield, the uncertainty of the situation was torturous. The longer the wait, the more it gnawed at him. His resolve was starting to weaken under the pressure. Was he about to lose his shot at history? With each passing day, the anticipation for the fight reached a boiling point. Tyson's injury, Holyfield's uncertainty, and the mounting tension between the two fighters set the stage for what promised to be an explosive confrontation. But as the story unfolded, the world was left wondering, would Tyson be able to fight at all? And if so, could he truly overcome his own personal demons? Would Holyfield be able to defend his title, or would he crack under the weight of expectations? The clock was ticking, and the stage was set for a showdown that would shake the very foundations of boxing. The fight was finally confirmed. Mike Tyson, despite the injury scare, had cleared his medical tests and was ready to step into the ring once again. The world buzzed with excitement. There would be no more speculation, no more waiting. Tyson and Holyfield were set to face off in the rematch that had seemed impossible just weeks before. But there was something different in the air this time, a subtle shift that both fighters felt. The pressure was almost suffocating, and it wasn't just because of the rivalry. This fight had become a battle for their very identities. Tyson entered the ring with a calmness that seemed foreign to his usual demeanor. His eyes weren't filled with the rage that once defined him. Instead, there was an eerie sense of control. He had spent weeks, even months, preparing his mind as much as his body. The presence of his psychologist in his camp was no longer just a novelty. It was now a lifeline. Tyson wasn't just fighting for a title or legacy. He was fighting to reclaim himself, to prove that he could overcome the chaos inside. His movements were calculated, deliberate, like a man who had finally found a way to silence the inner storm. Holyfield, on the other hand, looked more focused than ever. His self-doubt had been replaced by a quiet confidence. He had confronted his own fears, his own insecurities, and had come to terms with the fact that the world would always expect him to be more than human. The pressure was immense, but he had learned to embrace it. He was no longer just fighting for his legacy, but for his peace of mind, for the sense of accomplishment that could only come from proving that his victory over Tyson hadn't been a fluke. This fight was his chance to secure his place as a true champion, one who had earned every ounce of respect. As the bell rang and the two men squared off, the fight felt almost surreal. The crowd watched in awe as Tyson and Holyfield circled each other, each with a different aura about them. Gone was the reckless aggression of Tyson's youth. In its place was the calm of a man who had learned to control his own impulses. Holyfield, ever the tactician, moved with a sense of purpose, anticipating Tyson's every move as though he had already mapped out every punch before it was thrown. The first few rounds were a masterclass in strategy. Tyson's punches were sharp, yet measured, while Holyfield danced around him, his footwork as light as ever. The battle was not just physical, it was psychological. Tyson, despite his newfound calm, still had a fire that burned within him, a hunger that pushed him forward, even when his body screamed for rest. Holyfield, for his part, displayed the heart and discipline that had carried him to the top. But there were moments when doubt flickered in his eyes, the weight of his past victories threatening to consume him. But then, just as the fight seemed to reach a stalemate, something unexpected happened. In the 6th round, Tyson, for the first time in the fight, let his guard down. Perhaps it was the culmination of his journey, or perhaps it was a moment of vulnerability that he could no longer contain. In that instant, Holyfield saw an opening, a small crack in Tyson's armor. Without hesitation, Holyfield launched a devastating uppercut that landed squarely on Tyson's chin. The punch was a blur, its power undeniable. Tyson staggered back, his eyes wide with shock, as he struggled to regain his balance. The crowd erupted into chaos as Tyson dropped to his knees, the unexpected blow a clear sign that the fight was slipping out of his grasp. For a moment, it seemed as though Tyson might not get up. His years of fighting, both in and out of the ring, had taken their toll. The psychological warfare, the injury scare, and the weight of his past mistakes seemed to catch up with him all at once. Tyson tried to push himself to his feet, but his body wasn't responding the way it once had. Holyfield, sensing his opponent's weakness, moved in for the finish, but something stopped him, something deep inside that told him to show respect. Holyfield, ever the sportsman, backed off, allowing Tyson the time he needed. The crowd was silent, unsure whether to cheer or mourn. Tyson, after a long, painful pause, managed to get back up, though it was clear he was struggling. The fight had taken everything out of him. But in that moment, Tyson made a decision not just to continue fighting, but to end this chapter of his life on his own terms. The man who had once been a symbol of rage was now fighting for redemption, not just in the ring, but in his soul. The final rounds were a blur of punches, sweat, and sheer willpower. Tyson fought with everything he had left, but it wasn't enough. Holyfield, with his calm focus and undeniable resilience, outlasted him, landing punch after punch until, in the final round, the referee stepped in and stopped the fight. Holyfield had won again, but this time the victory felt different. It wasn't just about the title. It was about the journey, the growth, the respect between two men who had been through hell and back. As the referee raised Holyfield's hand in victory, the crowd roared, but it wasn't the same deafening cheer that had greeted his first victory over Tyson. This time, it was more reflective, more respectful, as if everyone understood the true significance of what had just transpired. Tyson, though defeated, had proven something important. He had shown that he was more than his past mistakes, more than the chaos that had once defined him. In many ways, his battle wasn't just with Holyfield, it was with himself. And while he hadn't won the fight, there was a quiet sense of redemption in the way he had fought through his own personal struggles. Holyfield, for his part, knew this victory was the culmination of more than just physical prowess. It was the result of everything he had endured to get to this point. But there was no celebration, no pomp and circumstance. He had already faced his biggest opponent, doubt. The real victory, he realized, was in conquering that. In the end, the fight between Tyson and Holyfield wasn't just a rivalry. It was a story of redemption, resilience, and the human spirit. Both men had lost something in their pursuit of greatness, But in the process, they had found something much more valuable, themselves. And as they walked out of the ring, their futures uncertain but their paths forever changed. The world was left to wonder what comes next for two legends who had already faced their greatest battles. Only time would tell.